Good morning and welcome to the first TechSpark Coffee Morning in autumn 2020. We've had a bit of a break over the summer, but we are glad to be back and we've got some really interesting things to talk about. Obviously, unfortunately, COVID has not stopped over the summer, so we're still doing these virtually. And I hope you find them useful, but if people want to suggest subjects or things that we can do, we're always up for conversation. What we're going to be talking about this morning is the future of talent. So talent and the way that people think about talent and handle talent has changed a lot in the last few months. So I think we talked a little bit about this in April, I think, but the world has moved on a lot since April. So I thought it'd be really useful for us to have a further conversation. And I'm really delighted that we have two of my favourite people here today. So we have Zara and Alan, who are both experts in this and have lots to say, hopefully. So what we're going to do is I have some topics and some conversation that I want to get out of these guys, and we'll talk both about some of the immediate impacts, but also some of the medium long-term impacts that we're starting to see coming out. But as always, if you have any questions or things that you would like to ask the panelists, please do put your questions in the chat at the right of the page. Please make sure at the top of the page you should be able to see you can toggle between stage and event. Please put your questions in the stage part because that's the bit we're in. If you put them in the event part, I will miss them. That's pretty much from me for now. I have a whole heap of things to tell you about later on, but let's kick off with our conversation. So I think lots of the people in the audience will probably already know who you both are, but it always bears doing to introduce ourselves. So let's kick off. So Zara, would you like to introduce who you are and a bit of your story?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here, Ben. Delighted to have the coffee morning start again. Although I have to say, if we also have to go back to Saturday virtual quizzes, I might have to reconsider my purpose in life. I run a company. I'm the founder and the CEO of a company called Gap Square. And what we do is we look at the future of work and how we can use data and tech to make the future of work more fair. And usually we work with companies to look at their payroll and HR data to help them understand where they have gaps in talent or gaps in pay that they can rectify and move forward in a more meaningful way. What we've also done during COVID is added a new dimension to our work, and that's specifically around how we look at companies and the extent to which they're diverse and inclusive to see how they can adapt to change and how they can build more resilience. We've seen over the past few months, we've moved through the biggest social experiment in the future of work. We see what it looks like. It's not only changed where people do work, because now I'm at my kitchen table, but also changed how we do work and what kind of work we do. So I think it's an important conversation to have right now, and I'm excited to be here.
Cool, thanks, Zara. Alan, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Really pleased to be invited along and definitely looking forward to the conversation. So I moved to Bristol 20 years ago, came into university, and like a lot of people have stuck around ever since. Most of the work I've done has been in recruitment. So to begin with, recruiting for technology roles in the Southwest, moving a bit further afield. I now run a business with my business partner, Henry, which is ISL recruitment. We're Bristol based, but work in the UK, recruiting for largely technical roles, but very much with technology startups and scale-ups. So I'm really pleased that the business that we've built is a great place to work. We've won awards the same name, but I do definitely feel it every day we come in. And part of our kind of purpose is helping make other companies great places to work by finding them great people, really. It's obviously, as with all businesses, it's been a challenging time. Jobs haven't been abundant in the last few months. But I'm really pleased with how we've maintained some really good relationships and in some cases recognised we needed to work harder to be helpful and create value to people rather than necessarily be all about jobs. And I'm really really positive about what that means for the future. I'm keen to talk about it today.
Cool. So I guess let's kick off with the sort of obvious. Obviously, we've seen a huge change in how people are working, and it's been a big adaptation for all of us, whether you're someone working in a business, someone who owns a business, someone who's helping other businesses. But I'd be interested to get your views on whether you think some of that change, we've started to settle into that now and we understand it a bit more, and whether maybe we're even starting to see some of the benefits of that change. Either one of you, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So what we've done over the past few months, we started to bring together data from ONS and McKinsey and Mercer and all kind of different think tanks to look at how the future of work is changing and how work is changing currently. And one of the things that we've seen is that only 26% companies think that they won't make any changes to their remote working policies now or in the immediate future, which means 3/4 of organizations are moving towards that or doing something about it. At the same time, there's reports from like Salesforce saying that 69% of employees really want to take up remote working more, and a combination between remote working and coming into the office. We see a lot of companies starting to think about their workforce as not necessarily being in the same city as them, or not even necessarily or any longer being in the same country as them. So there's definitely a change and a shift in how companies are thinking about remote working. What it also uncovers is that companies that had flexible policies already, because they were thinking about more diverse workforce, they're thriving right now because they have everything in place. And what we also see is that for some companies, it raises questions around productivity, because a lot of people still misunderstand for productivity for presenteeism and seeing someone there all the time. So it's a lot of questions still that HR departments are struggling with, but definitely we see that companies that had flexible working policies in place and we're actually looking at remote working already are the ones that are doing well right now.
Cool.
And I definitely back up some of that, both from a personal and from a business point of view. I mean, I think it's not been an overall positive, of course, the last few months, but there's positives I've taken from it personally. Like going to drop my 6-year-old off at school this morning at 8:45 and be able to, walk 2 minutes back to the house was great, and something that I couldn't do if I was more traditionally going into the office at 8:30. I think that there's definitely, we're one of those businesses, as Zara mentioned, where we had an element of flexible working before. I'm sure that will look slightly different in the future, but actually we were probably more able to adapt. Fortunately, we'd invested in laptops and Office 365 back in January in some sort of eerily prescient move around adapting. But I think there's definitely a disparity in how it's affected people, of course. It's something that's affected all of us, but clearly in different ways. So, I'm fortunate in that I've got, a lounge, a kitchen, a bedroom. If my wife and I are both working from home, then we can do that, as opposed to someone who's in a 1-bedroom flat. Actually the childcare thing is a big thing that's affected people in different ways, and I think that's the big thing that's looming there is actually kind of what the ongoing impact of that is, because clearly there's been, most people have seen some positives, but a lot of people haven't come anywhere near to that at all.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing, isn't it? In the sense that there are some positives, but there's certainly been some negatives. I know Zara and I have some mutual friends who are, I've never seen someone more delighted to have sent her children away to school again and not have to have them work. So I guess that's absolutely a downside. And I wonder, is that something you've thought about as businesses? And I guess related to that, there's both for parents, but also I've noticed specifically with younger people who are sharing smaller spaces, there's a real mental health challenge as well that we've had to start thinking about much more as businesses than we would have done before, definitely.
I think for sure the mental health challenge is real. And if you look at studies that are coming out of the Institute of Employment Studies and Gartner, we haven't been able to achieve work-life balance in the past 6 months. So overall, if you look at the entire workforce, I think more than 50% of the workforce is saying they have no work-life balance in working from home. So there's definitely work to be done there, because I don't know if you've seen, there was a cartoon in the New Yorker, I think, where this person was in the office and they were saying, I can't remember anymore if I live at the office or work from home. So I think that's the kind of balance we're trying to strike right now. And each organization really needs to take time and think about this. We've run some studies with employers in the UK and Europe, and very few of them actually ask their employees if they have childcare responsibilities outside the work, and very few know if their employees would have to go and care for those children in case anything happens. So we need to change that narrative and take those things into account. Current guidelines say that if children have cold symptoms, that they shouldn't be going to school. If within a bubble in a school, 1 or 2 children are going to get COVID symptoms, then the whole bubble will have to quarantine for 14 days. So that has a significant impact on parents. And by parents, I largely mean women who will have to pick up a lot of that work. And I think it's imperative that employers start to think about how they're going to create a platform so that those employers can continue to thrive in current circumstances.
Yeah, and I think on the women and childcare aspect, because it is very much tied together, and I think there was some data from Oxford and Cambridge that looked at actually the amount of women that were more likely to be, or women were much more likely to be furloughed to take on childcare responsibility than men were. I think there was some data on pay, which Zara might know better than me, but 75% of men had their pay topped up while on furlough, only 65% of women. I know just kind of intuitively, if more women are working more flexible in part-time work, maybe it was natural that childcare was thrown at them. And I think there's a danger that I wrote about it in a column for Recruiter magazine a couple of months ago, that coming out of this, the men might be seen as heroes because they've been there going out to work every day, whether it's in their bedroom or to their office. Well, the women have had to step back from work and actually have taken on the childcare responsibilities, and whether it's either someone like myself as a recruiter or even playing a role as an employer, it's then important that you don't overlook that, well, if they spent 6 months, predominantly doing childcare versus someone else who's spent 6 months working, then how are you actually bringing that into your hiring process to make sure you're not unfairly disadvantaging that one group?
Yeah, it's a really difficult challenge, isn't it? And I haven't really thought about it, Zara, in terms of people not report. So we're a tiny organisation, so I know the childcare responsibilities of all of our team. But yeah, I haven't really thought in terms of, as a bigger organisation, who records that, how do you make sure that doesn't then impact on where you are looking at people's performance, what that is, and how you make sure that's thought about in a fair way. And I guess those are some of the challenges that people are going to have to think about as we go forward through this. And it's because this isn't a problem that's going to go away at all, is it?
I think one of the things that was mentioned in maybe the New York Times this weekend was Salesforce gave all parents 10 weeks off early on in coronavirus. And I think Facebook maybe did the same, maybe 6 weeks or so. And actually it was talking about a backlash among those employees that weren't parents because they were kind of perceived as being there manning the ship, while actually the parents had an easy ride with 10 weeks off, which, I'm sure Zara will back up my thoughts that it's not an easy ride, but I think it's also about the people within the business, and where obviously businesses large and small want to make sure they've got an inclusive culture and they're reacting to people's needs. I think sometimes acting to be responsive to an individual can create a sense of injustice, as it had done there, around people getting treated differently, but clearly because of their different situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're also going to see some differences between UK companies and US companies, because US schools haven't gone back in a similar way that UK schools have. So most schools in the US have continued to do virtual learning. So that means I have colleagues in partner or client companies that we work with who have left their jobs because they can't homeschool and do virtual schooling with their children and work at the same time. Whereas here, schools have gone back. So I think that we're going to see a difference in terms of representation of different genders in the workforce going forward across the two countries.
Cool. So if we look a little bit more into the future, and particularly at the tech sector, because obviously that's sort of where we all intersect. TechNation this week has released a report that has some really interesting stats, very positive, well, potentially very positive stats on recruitment and growth and talent within the clusters. So they were saying that I'm going to have to read this. I haven't memorized these stats. Advertised roles in tech have increased by 36% since June of this year, which I guess may have been a low base. But now 24% of all vacancies that are advertised in the Bristol area are tech vacancies, which seems a huge number. And I guess part of that is the businesses that have been doing well, the businesses that have been able to sell still, have quite often been tech businesses. But I'd be really interested to get your perspective as people who work very closely in that community of whether you think there is going to be this sort of huge continued growth. And, if we were doing this 12 months ago, what I would have been saying is, it's great there's loads of growth, but there's nobody to fill these jobs. We've got miles more demand than we have supply, and we're all screwed. And I stopped saying that for 6 months, and now it feels like I'm going to have to start saying it again. So it'd be great to get your views on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that too when I saw the stats. I thought, well, if there was 0 jobs in June, and now it's a 36% increase, that's 36 jobs. So, yeah, I think what this pandemic has exposed is, one, our vulnerability to public health issues, but also our reliance on tech. And this is why we're going to see a boom in development of tech and automation of work. I think that's going to be really high on the agenda. We've seen a lot of funding go towards companies that track performance at work, that track remote working, that facilitate that kind of working from home. So more and development of more of that kind of technology is going to be on the cards. But I think another thing that this crisis has exposed is actually how much everything is about human-to-human contact and interaction. So however we do tech going forward, and how we build that automation and how we build those tools that help us to do our work from wherever we are, needs to happen in a way that still facilitates that human-to-human connection. Because at the end of the day, that's what a lot of the mental health and well-being issues come down to. So I think we are going to see an increase in this kind of roles. From my point of view, I'd really love to make sure that they have a very diverse representation, so that we continue to build tech that is inclusive and that works for everyone. Another thing that this crisis has exposed with, for instance, the A-level results this summer, is how biased tech can be. So now's the time where we can turn the tide and turn things around and do things better and involve most of the population in conversation about tech, because we're going to rely on tech more and more going forward.
Yeah, and a couple of thoughts on this from my end. So I definitely felt fortunate that, early stages of the pandemic, that we were in tech rather than some of my peers that recruit for retail roles, where through no fault of their own, their world suddenly changed much more than ours did. We definitely saw, we focus on technology without being wedded to a particular sector within that. So clearly, if we're working with a company like Expedia, they suddenly stop recruiting, whereas companies within health tech or working within productivity or remote working tools were naturally more kind of immune to what had happened. I think what we're starting to see now is that less kind of roll of the dice, whether you lost or won wasn't really in your own destiny. And I think we're starting to see businesses that have, either because of what they've done previously or because of how they've adapted swiftly compared to their peers, are actually growing again. I was looking at our numbers yesterday, and we're only 20 people as opposed to the Tech Nation data, but we've done 50% more placements in July and August than we did in May and June, but they're probably still, on a per head basis, we're still a third off where we were at the start of the year or the back end of, or maybe this time last year. I think they're definitely, the data's on adverts, so it's easier to post an advert than make a hire, of course. So, hopefully that will come through, but I think there'll be still a lot of companies out there that are very uncertain, and maybe going to the market to see what's there, perhaps to sort of see if they can get that wonderful hire. And of course, making sure that they're bringing in diverse people is really important. But, I think there's still definitely a fragility to their confidence in terms of making those hiring decisions, unless they've got some real wind behind them because they were in a particular sector, or they've managed to sort of pivot or adapt particularly well.
And thinking about that uncertainty and confidence, as if there wasn't enough uncertainty and confidence, we're obviously about to go into Brexit, or maybe not into Brexit, or something might happen with Brexit, and we're likely to be going into some type of giant recession, one way or the other. And I'd be interested in understanding where you think the risks and things that have dropped. So I know, Zara, we've talked a couple of times about how payback reporting was postponed this year, and that's something that's really important around driving change and is something that we shouldn't be jettisoning because we're about to go through all this change. Are you seeing lots of activity happening in that space and things starting to come together again, or is it still too early and it's a bit of a unknown?
I think what has happened is the Black Lives Matter movement has actually pushed this agenda forward a lot more, even more so than the legislation before, or the planned legislation around asking companies to report on ethnicity pay gaps. So in the initial stages, when companies were just going into this crisis, we've seen most businesses furlough their diversity and inclusion managers, which kind of signaled where this agenda sits within the wider kind of company strategy. August saw companies starting to return those employees back and starting to actually think, what are they doing about ethnicity, about race, about gender? Because a lot of the customers and a lot of employees or young workforce is looking at them saying, what are you doing about this agenda? It is an important one, and it's not going to go away. And we know a lot of businesses, in Bristol in particular, businesses like WorkLife and Graphcore, that are doing a lot in terms of continuing to look at their data to understand where the gaps are and how they can move beyond those gaps. So it's been really exciting to see the positive change. But also, expectedly, we saw the larger companies kind of put the agenda on hold and push it into the backseat because they saw other priorities. Whereas what we've seen now is that companies that kept diversity and inclusion in the driving seat, actually the ones that have adapted better to change, have had plans to reinvent and rethink about how they do things and take some policies that were applied to diversity and inclusion and apply them wider to the organization in terms of making the organization more agile and adaptable to change.
Yeah, and I think definitely from the early stage businesses I talked to, Zara's exactly right. You know, the Black Lives Matter has put this front of mind for leaders of businesses, for founders of businesses, much more so, I think, than any legislation would have done. You know, we took on a CTO assignment this week, and very much the first thing that the female CEO was saying is what she wanted from a diversity point of view, more than what she wanted from a skills point of view or from a technology point of view. And I definitely see that across, much more broadly around creating an inclusive culture within the business and hiring diversely. It's very much, I think a year ago, of course, it was important, and before that as well, but it's much more front of mind for those smaller businesses that can see that it's a really important part of building a stronger business for the future. You know, one or two simple things they can do can actually make a real impact at a key stage as they grow, rather than actually say we're only going to address this when we're a bigger business and then find actually they've got a lot more, knitting to unstitch to get to where they want it to be.
Yeah, and another thing that we've seen also with organizations that have adapted better to change is the ones that are moving beyond thinking within the constraints of a job description and actually thinking how they can reuse and redeploy talent across the organization and reskill, upskill, and rethink and redeploy resources is definitely important.
Yeah, I think as with all businesses, we thought about how we make our business relevant in the future. And a lot of that is actually stopping or starting things that we wouldn't have done 6 months ago. And the big thing that I've been latching onto is around the values and the diversity side of things. And then I'm obviously latching onto it because it's important to the companies we work with, and making sure that we're not reliant on 2 bits of paper, a job description and a CV to try and get a perfect match. That there's a process that might still involve those things, but is much more with the job descriptions, taking things back to exactly what's the purpose of the role and what are the achievements or the capabilities you want in people. And I think also a recognition around businesses that they maybe focus a little bit too much on technical skills, and the skills that really matter to them now, whether it's adaptability or resilience or flexibility, weren't discussed on a job specification, or weren't discussed at interview, or weren't part of the messages they send out in terms of employer branding and why might people want to work for them. And we know that there's so much data around, if you're talking about these things, not when someone comes to interview or when you give them a job description, but just in terms of your social media, how the leaders talk, how you are on social media, you'll attract a much more diverse audience. You also need to then have a process that matches what you're talking about. But I think that's a big part of what people can do to improve diversity in terms of bringing in talent to their business.
So that cultural piece is really interesting, and that piece of, it's absolutely true. You can't have a culture when you're a small company and assume that you're going to make a bigger, better culture when you're a bigger company, because a culture is a culture and it evolves, but you can't suddenly change it. And just thinking about what you're talking about there, Alan, and I think it's interesting what you're saying around sort of how you build that into a culture, and effectively the talent acquisition part is part of your general marketing. It's about making sure people understand how you sit as a company. In an era where we're going to have to do much of this remotely, people are going to work remotely, how do you think we will be able to do that recruitment? Because it's not the same as come into the office and meet with us and we'll see what you're like. And that in many ways opens doors to a whole set of people that wouldn't have opened before. But it also makes it more difficult for people who are broadly lazy and just recruit to their own image.
Yeah, I think there's a big challenge there. I think part of it is perhaps even at that early stage, thinking about the process you're going through, to be really deliberate about how you actually assess the values of people coming in, and making sure it's a two-way thing. I think, I definitely was, from a personal point of view, there was a lady who came to interview us a couple of years ago, and we won awards for a great place to work for women. So I'm proud of the kind of the quality and diversity we've got. But she met 5 males in her interview process, and thankfully I didn't dissuade her from taking the job. But actually, it was clearly something that even 2 years on, it stuck with her. So I think it's kind of reviewing the hiring process. It's making sure that that you've got to have an authentic story, but making sure the story you're presenting is very much one that, if someone was there internally and seeing it, and obviously in these times where they can't see it, they can't come to your reception and have to be friendly. People walk past them that are clearly a diverse bunch of people, as much as you can judge from looking at people. Then actually, you've really got to put more effort into how you present that online. I think the amount of candidates we speak to who will make a decision, not to the extent of accepting an offer, but very much as to whether they're serious about an employer before they ever meet with someone from the employer's end, because the expectation is they would see the leader on social media, or they would see a career section that doesn't just have a job description or titles, but actually has real photos of the people within the business, whether that's doing Zoom quizzes or whether that's running around in the field, whatever it is that is part of your culture. And so I think it does very much become a marketing piece. But the important to emphasize there is that it can't be marketing. You can of course market your aspirations, but I think it's got to be genuine and authentic and transparent, rather than performing yourself as someone you're not, and then when you get into business, there was that clarity in that.
I think so. Lucy has a question which is almost a logistical question, but that's sort of when you're looking at recruiting, are things like CVs without names, is that the type of stuff we just need to get rid of in terms of conscious bias? Zara, I know you've done lots of work with Applied, who've looked at this sort of stuff.
Yeah, we have done that, and we've actually changed our recruitment process altogether. So we don't do CVs, and we haven't done them in a few years, because we think CVs are really a very old-fashioned, blunt tool in terms of showcasing people's attitudes and their abilities to learn and adapt and lead on change. So what we do is, usually when we advertise for a job, we have 5 questions that we ask people, and they answer those questions with as much of their experience as they can. We get the answers without anyone's names and any information about their education or previous background. We usually don't know the gender or ethnicity of the person we have invited to an interview until they're actually in an interview. It's been an interesting summer because we have recruited a few people, and we've actually retained one of our interns as a full-time employee. He's been with us for 3 months now, and next week is the first time I actually get to see him in person. So definitely a different kind of time. But the point I'm trying to make is that we don't use CVs. We ask 5 questions about how people will deal in different circumstances and what they would do, and ask them to tell us about their previous experience in managing some change or leading on a project or whatever it is that the job asks for, and then we evaluate based on that. And also when we evaluate the answers, we don't do each candidate question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We do all questions number 1, then all questions number 2, and then we tally up the scores. That way we can't really start to put together a person and start to feel like they are a bit like us, and therefore they need to be interviewed because they must be great if they're like us.
Yeah, and I think like Zara's definitely doing the right thing there. There's definitely an argument to say that you can remove names from CVs and anonymize them, but I think actually forgetting about the CV for a second and thinking about how you can change your hiring process, as Zara's done. It's when we brought trainees into our business, we probably do keep the CV and look at it at the 3rd stage, but first of all we're testing things like drive and ambition and aptitude for learning, and that are much more important to us. And I do definitely see more companies now that actually, if they're bringing applications in, they're doing it through people filling in a type form or some sort of thing that captures key questions like Zara's mentioning, rather than actually ask them where they went to university or has their name displayed blatantly at the top of the CV before even you've gone into some of the stuff that's on there.
Cool. And I guess so. I think it feels like there's a couple of different opportunities here. There's an opportunity in terms of reskilling and repositioning people who are already in businesses, because lots of businesses have changed significantly. But also thinking about younger people and how we bring younger people into businesses and what that looks like. And I think there's a real, as David has mentioned in the chat, there's a real challenge of how you induct people and how you build people's cultures, explain the culture to people as they're doing that remotely, and particularly young people, because quite often they've never worked in a business before. So they come with either no or false expectations. Is that something you've looked at much?
I mean, we've taken on 3 interns this summer. So it was taken on young people completely remotely. They were in different parts of the UK. Yesterday, one of them was in Italy even. So it's been interesting taking them on and bringing them into the company culture without actually having them in an environment where you can portray that company culture in a 9-to-5 kind of setting. So but it's possible because it's been young people who have been excited about having a job and about having an experience and learning, and actually, as most young people would be. So, yeah.
And I think that anecdotally, the role that we've taken on board, there's been a lot less of those that have been junior or entry level roles. I think that the confidence in hiring a CTO or a lead developer and actually assuming and obviously going through your checks and measures to make sure they can do their job and be productive quite quickly, even if that's in a remote environment. It's a lot easier to say yes to that person, I think, than it is to bring in someone who's got no experience, and whether it's Zara's interns or a junior developer, to actually then think about how do I train that person. Now, I again, from a personal point of view, I spent I smoked 10 cigarettes a day for the first 10 years or so of my career. And if I think back to the amount that I learned and soaked up through the cigarette breaks where I'd be talking to a Ben or a Zara that had been there for years and just sort of saying, well, how about this? And I think it's that incidental learning and support that if you've been remote first for 4 or 5 years, you've probably got a process that works. But clearly for most companies, their existing team, if it was the 3 of us working together a business last year, we can jump on and we can do Zoom calls, but bring a 4th person into that team. Partly, I think, if they're junior in terms of how do you actually onboard and support them. But I think more broadly, whether they're junior or senior, how you bring them into the culture, how you make sure that you get to know them, that you don't need to be their best friend, but actually you've got that sense of community with them as much as you would with the people that you've been with for a year or so. I think it's it's a real challenge, and I think we'll definitely see hopefully some good solutions around that. But I don't think I've not really seen any companies that have properly nailed that. How do I bring someone new, stroke junior, on board and make sure that I can onboard them as quickly as possible, or sorry, as well as possible I did before? And I think that clearly then creates a reluctance to bring those people on board, which is a real challenge around building the future workforce and helping bring diverse and young people into the workforce, which is really still what's needed within tech, even though there's obviously a change in balance of the labour market.
And I think these difficulties is one of the reasons a lot of the big businesses have also paused or cancelled their graduate schemes and their intake of young talent right now, because of the situation and the context in which they would have to train up that talent and bring them in. One other thing we've done at Gap Square is we have Friday afternoons set aside for learning and development and also for reflection, so that we can have conversations that aren't necessarily some action driven or something that we need to do, but more around reflecting on what we've done in the week and how we can improve and how we can keep in touch better. So reflection periods really have been helpful.
Yeah, I think with the reality where most businesses are going to have a significant element of flexibility for the foreseeable, and I think probably forever for a lot of businesses, that it definitely it creates an opportunity to bring in, or make the roles more accessible to disabled workers or those with childcare. So I think that although there's definitely some challenges, there are clearly some positives around access to talent, being able to tap into a global talent market rather than one that's within 30 minutes of your office, but also be able to reach different people within that talent market and have the do the work when you want rather than necessarily clock in and clock out type approach.
And I guess this is probably quite a good point to mention Kickstart job scheme. So hopefully this will be something that helps us bring some young people into the community, but also increases the diversity of that community. So for people that don't know, and I know both Alan and Zara do know about it because we've been talking about it, the Kickstart job scheme is a new funded programme by government. The government will fund for the first 6 months 25 hours a week of a under 25 who is at risk of long-term unemployment. So it's effectively an opportunity for businesses to be able to onboard a new starter who is a young person for 6 months, broadly risk-free as far as cash is concerned, but gives them an opportunity to get that person up to speed, induct them into their businesses, and hopefully, obviously, get some value from that person as well. So that's launching at the moment. TechSpark is working with Business West on that. So if anybody does want to take anybody on, please drop one of the team a note, and we'd be more than happy to do that. One of the slight drawbacks at the moment is the government is currently saying, as a business, you have to take on a minimum of 30 people to do that, or you have to be in a group of different businesses doing that. So what we're doing is bringing together tech and digital businesses, none of whom so far have wanted to take on 30 people, and build a partnership so that we can successfully do that. So if you are interested, please do give me or any of the team a shout. I will drop in, I have, in fact already have, dropped in a link which tells you a little bit more about it.
That's the sort of thing where that's a great incentive for businesses to bring new people into the workforce, particularly those 16 to 24-year-olds that are arguably worse affected. But I think it's also then thinking about how can that necessity to meet a 30 criteria become a positive, and if the three of us and 27 other businesses take on one person each, how can we bring those people together to actually help support their development, so that we're not having to do it all ourselves, but we're actually making much more positive impact on the community rather than just helping that one person.
And certainly one of the things, and it's very early stage, but one of the things we're looking at with the programme is there is a little bit of budget for training and development. So are there things that we could do where we could help the Kickstart job candidates with mentors? So mentors who aren't necessarily one of us, who probably have quite a different life to a 22-year-old. I certainly have a different life from when I was 22. But matching them with someone who's got 2 or 3 years work experience, who can talk about what they're doing, what the culture's like, what it's like remotely. So the whole set of those things, I think that this gives us an opportunity to set up in a way that you wouldn't traditionally be able to do in a small business. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I'd quite like to think about what you think as experts, where you think there's been some permanent change and where you think we're going to revert, because there's a real chance that we'll just revert back to normal of 7 months ago. But there are some things I think we'd all like to keep. What are your views? What do you think we'll keep? Do you think it'll all be good, or do you think we'll revert to some of the bad?
Well, we've definitely reverted back to traffic. I tried to come into Bristol yesterday. It took an hour. So that hasn't been a positive experience. But I think if I was to name one thing that is here to stay, I think that one thing is blended working. And that is kind of a combination between working remotely and working in an office and meeting with the team in some kind of capacity. I think that provide some opportunities in terms of how we think about flexible working and who we involve in different kind of jobs. It also provides some challenges in terms of having to be aware of how you discuss different projects and who you make project leads, depending on who's right there in front of you in the office that day, or how you start to think about your workforce as a whole. So I think it's something that is going to be work in progress, but blended working is definitely here to stay.
Yeah, I think I'm cautiously optimistic about the change that we will see. I think I'm sure I'd seen articles at the start of the year saying, what would 2025 look like from a working point of view? And I think that coronavirus has accelerated a lot of that change, which was going to come anyway. So I think, as I was pointing on the flexibility of working, I think that will be here to stay. I think companies obviously have to work out what is right for them rather than just rush to keep up with the Joneses and find out that's something that doesn't quite fit their organisation. I think that with the two other things, there's definitely the opportunity for a better access to talent, which links into that. And I think just in terms of bringing inclusivity and building an inclusive culture front of mind, I think that's one of the things that I'm really hopeful will be a legacy that sticks with us. And I think that it's clearly one of those things that won't happen without action. It's not just going to naturally fall into place. So I think that's definitely something that leaders of businesses or people in the community or individuals, that I think that's something that clearly will need some concerted effort and some collaboration and togetherness.
Cool, thanks guys. And I guess there's always a final question, which I ask everybody, and everybody gives me the same bloody answer. But it's useful that we have consistency, I guess. What is it that you think makes the Bristol and Bath tech community unique and stand out?
So I think there's a general point, which is that whether it's either where you're buying your croissants from or your beer from, I think people are much more conscious around where their pounds are going and looking to spend that locally. So that's obviously something that's not unique to Bristol. That would be the same whether you're in Bristol, Manchester, or Brighton. I think I've definitely, again, it always comes to your own experiences, but Bristol having 2 universities, having TechSpark, Engine Shed, Set Squared, Future Space. There's some great organisations there that it's not all about technology, but where that's 100% going to be a key part of the growing of the economy in the future, locally and nationally. I think we've got a massive platform for growth. I think if I think back to 4 or 5 years ago, probably Bristol was justified as a good place to run a tech business because it was close to London. Whereas I think actually there's a real opportunity to, and I think it already has become in many ways with people like Ultraleap and Graphcore that Zara mentioned, not to mention Gap Square and some of the other companies, that we've got our own community rather than necessarily being a community that's nearby to London. And I think that's the key opportunity for Bristol and the Southwest more broadly in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Ben. I think you're expecting something else, but it all comes back to the same thing. It's community, and it's the putting ethics and values first and foremost, and by that putting people first. So that's what makes this area so unique.
Yeah, that's good. I think as much as people always say community and they always say the ethics, the fact that everybody comes out with ethics and community says something about what we are as a place. And there's a thing in marketing of you need an authentic message and you need repetition of that message. So I guess at least if we're all going out with the same thing, that's what we're doing. We're marketing it. So on that theme, as some of you will know, the Bristol Tech Festival is coming back in a few weeks, which is an organisation, festival that's put together by a number of different people in the community. That's going to be back from the 9th to the 15th of November. The schedule is going to be announced in the next week or so, but if anyone wants to talk a bit more about the festival or potentially put an event on during the festival, please do get in touch with one of the launch team. Inevitably, you'll get in touch with me. So I'm one of the launch team, but there's a number of us from across lots of different organisations in the city. I've just dropped the article link into the chat if anyone wants to know a bit more about that. But thank you very much to our panelists today. I think it's been really interesting, and there's been lots of things there to think about, and to think about how you can change what you're doing and make sure that people are offering as much support to their teams and their community as possible. So thank you, Zara. Thank you, Alan. Every time I do this, I think I really need some type of thing that I can generate, so that you're not just awkwardly sat there while I say thank you and nobody says anything. But thank you very much. As always, with all of our TechSpark events, they're supported by our partners who enable everything to happen. So thank you so much to them, because we are a tiny community organisation who wouldn't exist without those partners. So I've got a lot of time and a lot of love for those partners. And a final thing, I guess, one of the other things we're doing in the community at the moment, and my colleagues Abby and Bryony are running with, is an investment competition at the moment. So we twice a year run investment showcases. So if you are running a startup who is looking to raise equity investment, or you know a startup that wants to raise equity investment, you can apply for the Silicon Gorge pitch competition. I know lots of you have previously done it. That competition closes for entries tomorrow, so there is not very much time to apply, but you can still get your application in. It doesn't take very long, and it's a great chance to be put into a whole set of different investors who are looking to put some money into some brilliant businesses here in the region. The final will actually be during the Bristol Tech Festival. It's all very joined up and together. I think that's pretty much it for me. Thank you very much again today to our panelists. The networking zone is open again, so if anybody wants to go in there and have a chat with people, please do. Otherwise, we are now going to be running coffee mornings fortnightly, so I will see you all, well, some of you I imagine I'll see before, but I will see you all here in a fortnight to talk about the next subject. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks.